The morning light barely made it through the thin curtains of the small apartment above the laundromat. It was gray and watery, like weak tea, and it spilled across the worn linoleum floor in uneven patches. Outside, the steady drum of rain had been going since before dawn, a soft but constant rhythm that matched the ache in Eleanor's joints. She lay still for a long moment listening, not to the rain but to the silence inside the room. No phone ringing. No knock at the door. No voice calling her name. Just the hum of the washing machines below, muffled through the floorboards, and the occasional groan of the old building settling into another day. She turned her head slowly toward the window. 80 years old today. 80. The number felt heavy like a stone in her chest. She'd woken up thinking maybe, just maybe, her son would remember. He lived in Florida now, working long hours at a warehouse, raising his own kids. They talked sometimes, but the calls had gotten shorter, farther between. Last week, she'd mentioned her birthday was coming up. He'd said, "Oh yeah, Ma, I'll call you then." And she'd held on to those words like a promise. But this morning, her phone sat dark and quiet on the nightstand, its screen blank. Eleanor pushed herself up, wincing as her knees protested. Every movement these days came with a price. She swung her legs over the edge of the narrow bed, her feet finding the cold floor. The apartment was small, just one room that held everything: a bed, a tiny kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, a table that doubled as her dining spot, an occasional desk, and a chair by the window where she liked to sit and watch the street. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She'd lived here for 12 years, ever since the rent on her old place jumped too high. This one was affordable, if barely. Her Social Security check covered rent, electricity, and medicine if she was careful. Real careful. She shuffled to the sink and filled the kettle. While it heated, she opened the small fridge. Inside, half a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a few slices of cheese wrapped in wax paper, and a single cupcake in a flimsy plastic container. She'd bought it yesterday at the discount grocery store down the block. It was slightly dented, the frosting smudged, but it was marked down to 99 cents. She'd stared at it for a full minute before putting it in her basket. "For my birthday," she'd told the cashier with a small smile as if it were a grand celebration. Now she took it out and placed it on the table. No candles. She didn't own any, and the thought of buying a whole box just for one seemed wasteful. Besides, what would she do with the rest? Blow out one imaginary flame, maybe. Make a wish. But wishes felt foolish at 80. She'd wished for so many things over the years. Health for her husband, safety for her children, just one more good year. And life had answered in its own way, not always kindly. The kettle whistled. She poured hot water over a tea bag, her last one, and sat down at the table. The cupcake sat in front of her like a tiny monument to the day. She peeled back the plastic lid. The frosting was pale pink, almost white in the dim light, and it had started to melt a little at the edges. She picked up a plastic fork from the drawer and took a small bite. It was sweet, overly so, and the cake was dry, but it was something. Something just for her. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle. A bus rumbled past. Life went on, loud and busy, just beyond her window. She used to be part of that rhythm. For 40 years, she'd worked as a home health aide, visiting elderly patients in their homes, helping them bathe, cook, remember to take their pills. She knew what loneliness looked like. She'd seen it in the eyes of men and women who hadn't had a visitor in months. She'd held their hands, listened to their stories, brought them small comforts. A fresh flower, a warm blanket, a joke from the newspaper. She never imagined she'd end up like them. Her husband, Robert, had been gone 23 years now. Heart attack, sudden and quiet, while he was fixing the back porch. One minute he was humming an old tune, the next gone. She'd raised their 2 kids alone after that, working double shifts, skipping meals so they could have new shoes for school. They'd grown up fine, better than fine. One became a teacher, the other an engineer. They called on holidays, sent cards, visited when they could. But time and distance had stretched the threads between them until they were almost invisible. She finished the cupcake and set the fork down. The silence pressed in again, heavier now. She thought about calling her son, just to hear his voice. But what would she say? "Happy birthday to me?" That felt pitiful. And what if he sounded rushed? What if he'd forgotten? She couldn't bear that. Better to sit with the quiet than risk the disappointment. She got up slowly and walked to the window. The rain had lightened to a mist. People hurried down the sidewalk under umbrellas, heads down, focused on getting somewhere. A young man jogged past, earbuds in, lost in his own world. A woman pushed a stroller, shielding the baby with a plastic cover. No one looked up. No one ever looked up at her window. She turned away and picked up the photo on the shelf, the only one she kept out. It showed her at 35, standing beside Robert in front of their first house. She wore a crisp white nurse's uniform, her hair neatly pinned back, smiling like she believed in forever. She traced the edge of the frame with her thumb. "We did okay, didn't we?" she whispered. The day stretched ahead, long and empty. She had no plans, no appointments, no errands she couldn't put off. She thought about knitting. She had a half-finished scarf in the basket by her chair, but her fingers ached too much today. Maybe she'd listen to the radio, or read a few pages of the library book she'd borrowed last week. Anything to fill the hours. But even as she reached for the book, a strange feeling settled over her. Not sadness exactly, but a deep, hollow kind of tired. Not just in her body, but in her spirit. She'd spent a lifetime caring for others. Who cared for her now? She sat back down at the table and stared at the empty cupcake container. The pink smear of frosting on the plastic looked sad, like a forgotten kiss. She thought about throwing it away, but instead she left it there, a small proof that today had happened. That she'd marked it, however, quietly. Downstairs, the laundromat opened. She heard the clang of the door, the whir of dryers starting up. The smell of detergent drifted up through the floor vents, clean and sharp. It reminded her of laundry day at home when the kids were little, the whole house smelling like sunshine and soap. She closed her eyes and let the memory wrap around her for a moment. When she opened them again, the room felt a little less cold. She stood, rinsed her teacup, and placed it carefully in the drying rack. Then she walked to her chair by the window and lowered herself into it. She pulled the thin afghan over her lap, the one she'd crocheted years ago, blue and soft, and watched the street. A little girl across the way was jumping in puddles, laughing as her father held her hand. Eleanor smiled faintly. Kids didn't know about birthdays like hers. They thought they'd live forever. Maybe that was a gift. She didn't cry. She was too tired for tears. But she let herself feel it. The weight of being alone on a day that should have meant something. And then slowly she began to let it go, because the rain would stop. The sun would come out. And tomorrow would be another day. For now, she sat in her chair, wrapped in her blanket, watching the world move on without her, and somehow, that was enough. The rain had softened to a mist by early afternoon, but the sidewalk still glistened, puddles catching the gray sky like broken mirrors. Down the street, a man hurried along, one arm full of grocery bags, the other holding the hand of a small girl in a bright yellow raincoat. She bounced more than walked, her boots splashing through every puddle she could find, her chatter rising above the hum of passing cars. "Look, that one's shaped like a heart," she said, pointing to a puddle near the curb. "Careful, you'll soak your socks," the man said, shifting the bags to keep them dry. He was tired, bone tired, but he tried to keep his voice light. His shift at the garage started in an hour, and he still needed to get dinner ready, help with homework, and maybe, if he was lucky, squeeze in 10 minutes to sit down. But the girl tugged his hand and pointed across the street. "Can we say hi to the window lady?" He followed her gaze. Up in the second-floor apartment above the laundromat, an elderly woman sat by the window just as she did most evenings. She never waved, never called out, just watched the street with quiet eyes. He'd seen her there for months, but never thought much about her. Just another face in the neighborhood. "She's not expecting us," he said gently, "and I've got to get home." "But it's her birthday," the girl insisted, her voice dropping to a whisper as if sharing a secret. "I saw her eating a cupcake all by herself this morning. No candles. No one with her." He paused. He hadn't noticed that, but now that she said it, he remembered glancing up earlier and seeing the woman at her table, head bowed over something small. He'd assumed she was just having a snack. "How do you know it's her birthday?" he asked. "I heard Mrs. Ruiz next door talking to the mailman. She said, 'Poor thing, turning 80 today and not a soul to visit.'" The girl's eyes were wide with concern. "We should say happy birthday." "Just for a second," he sighed. He didn't have time. But looking down at his daughter's earnest face, the same face that cried when a bug got squished, that shared her last cookie without being asked, he knew he couldn't say no. "Not to this." "All right," he said, but just a quick hello, then straight home. They crossed the street, the girl skipping ahead. The building was old, brick and chipped paint with a narrow staircase on the side leading up to the apartments. The buzzer for the second floor looked broken. Wires exposed, button loose. He pressed it anyway. Nothing happened. Maybe knock, the girl suggested. He climbed the steps, groceries still in hand, and knocked on the door marked 2B. He expected silence, or maybe a muffled "go away." But after a few seconds, the lock clicked and the door opened a few inches, held by a chain. 2 eyes peered out, pale blue, sharp but tired. The woman from the window. "Sorry to bother you," he said quickly. "I think we got the wrong apartment." "My daughter just wanted to—" Before he could finish, the girl stepped forward, beaming. "Happy birthday." The woman blinked. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then slowly, she unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. You know it's my birthday?" she asked, voice thin but clear. "My name's Lily," the girl said, as if that explained everything. "And this is my dad. We live 3 buildings down. I saw you this morning." With the cupcake. A flicker of something crossed the woman's face. Surprise, maybe embarrassment, then something softer. She glanced at the man, then back at the girl. "Well," she said finally, "that's very kind of you." She stepped back and gestured inside. "Come in out of the damp just for a moment." He hesitated. He didn't want to intrude. But the woman had already turned, shuffling slowly toward the small table by the window. Her movements were stiff, careful, like every step cost her something. The apartment was tiny but neat, everything in its place, though worn with time. A faded quilt on the bed, a single armchair by the window, a shelf with a few books and 1 framed photo. The air smelled faintly of tea and old paper. "Don't mind the mess," she said, though there was no mess to speak of. "I wasn't expecting company." "We won't stay long," he said, setting the grocery bags by the door. "Just wanted to say hello." Lily didn't need an invitation. She walked right in, eyes wide with curiosity. She spotted the empty cupcake container still on the table and pointed. "That's the one. Did you like it?" The woman gave a small laugh, soft, almost surprised, as if she'd forgotten what it sounded like. "It was sweet. A little too sweet, maybe, but I enjoyed it." "Next time you should have candles," Lily said seriously. "And singing. Birthdays need singing." The woman's smile widened just a little. "You're right about that." He watched them, struck by the ease between them. His daughter had a way of seeing people, not just their faces, but something deeper. She'd done the same with the old man who fed pigeons in the park, with the quiet boy at school who never spoke. She just reached out. "Can I sit?" Lily asked, already pulling out a chair. "Of course," the woman said. He stayed near the door, not wanting to overstay. But the woman turned to him. "You can sit too if you'd like." "I've got tea. Not much, but enough for 1 more cup." He glanced at his watch. He was already cutting it close. But something in her eyes, the quiet hope, the loneliness he now recognized, made him nod. "Thank you. Just for a minute." He sat at the table while the woman filled the kettle again. Her hands trembled slightly as she handled the tea bag, but she moved with practiced care. Lily chatted away, telling her about school, about the puddle shaped like a heart, about how she was learning to tie her shoes all by herself. "You're a smart one," the woman said, pouring hot water into a chipped mug. "How old are you?" 6.5, Lily added proudly. The woman handed the mug to him. "I was a nurse once. Worked in people's homes. I had 2 kids of my own. They're grown now. Live far away," he nodded. "I'm raising my daughter alone, too, since her mom passed." The woman's expression softened. "That's hard." "It is," he admitted. "But she keeps me going." Lily, sensing the shift in tone, reached into her raincoat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made you something." She handed it to the woman, a drawing in bright crayon. It showed a building with windows, a laundromat sign at the bottom, and in one window a small figure with white hair and a blue shawl. Below it, in wobbly letters, "Happy birthday, window lady." The woman stared at it. Her lips trembled. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone. "This is how beautiful," she whispered. "I've never been called window lady before." "You are to me," Lily said simply. He watched as the woman carefully smoothed the drawing on the table, as if it were something precious. And maybe it was. In a life that had grown quiet, a child's crayon drawing might be the brightest thing she'd seen in years. The kettle whistled again, just a soft sigh this time. The rain outside had nearly stopped. Sunlight tried to push through the clouds. "I should go," he said gently. "But thank you for the tea." The woman stood slowly. "Thank you for stopping. Most people don't." He picked up his groceries. Lily hugged the woman's waist, quick, warm, unexpected. The woman stiffened for a second, then patted her back, her hand lingering just a moment longer than necessary. At the door, the woman hesitated. Then she reached into a basket by her chair and pulled out a small knitted rabbit, soft gray yarn with button eyes and floppy ears. "For you," she said to Lily. "I made it last winter. Didn't have anyone to give it to." Lily took it with wide eyes. "It's perfect." They stepped out into the damp air. The street smelled fresh, clean. As they walked down the stairs, he glanced back. The woman stood in the doorway, watching them. When she saw him look, she raised her hand, just a small wave. He waved back. All the way home, Lily held the rabbit tightly, chattering about how nice the window lady was, how she should come over again, how they should bring her real cake next time. He didn't say much, but inside something had shifted. He'd gone up those stairs thinking he was doing a kind thing for a stranger. But walking away, he realized it was the stranger who'd given them something, a moment of connection, a reminder that no one should be invisible. Back in her apartment, the woman closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. Then she walked to the table and picked up the drawing. She held it in both hands, studying every crayon line. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden stripe across the floor. She didn't feel quite so alone anymore. The next Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of autumn day that smells like fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. The man stood outside the laundromat building, toolbox in one hand, grocery bag with leftover stew in the other, and his daughter bouncing beside him in red boots. He hadn't planned to come back so soon, but he'd promised. And promises mattered, especially to a 6-year-old who'd been talking nonstop about the window lady all week. "I brought the rabbit," Lily said, holding up the little gray knitted toy like a badge of honor. "She'll want to see it's safe." He smiled. "I'm sure she will." They climbed the stairs slowly. This time he didn't bother with the broken buzzer. He just knocked. After a few seconds, the door opened, not all the way, but enough to see her face. She looked surprised, then pleased, then quickly tried to hide it behind a neutral expression. "Oh," she said. "You came." "Said I would," he replied. "Thought I'd fix that buzzer while I'm here." "And Lily insisted on returning your rabbit, though I think she's already named it." Lily held it out solemnly. "His name is Mr. Hops, but he still belongs to you." "I'm just borrowing him." The woman's eyes softened. She stepped back and opened the door fully. "Well, come in then. Both of you." Inside, the apartment felt warmer than last time, maybe because of the sunlight streaming through the clean window, or maybe because there was a new drawing taped to the wall beside the old photo. It was the same building sketch Lily had given her, now carefully smoothed and displayed like art. He set down the stew on the small table. "Leftover from last night. Hope you like beef and carrots." "I love stew," she said, and for the first time he believed her. "But you didn't have to." "We wanted to," Lily said, already heading for the chair by the window like she belonged there, while Lily chatted about her week, how she'd learned to spell elephant, how her teacher said she drew the best clouds in class. He got to work on the buzzer. The wiring was old, frayed in places, but nothing he couldn't handle. He'd fixed worse things with duct tape and hope. As he worked, he listened to the two of them talk. The woman asked gentle questions, never prying, always listening. And Lily, usually a whirlwind of noise, spoke softly, as if sensing this space needed quiet care. At one point, the woman reached into a drawer and pulled out a small tin of hard candies. "Peppermint," she said, offering one to Lily. "My husband used to bring me these every Friday. Said they kept me sharp." Lily took one carefully. "Did he live here with you?" "No, dear. Long before this. We had a little house with a garden. He grew tomatoes taller than me." She smiled, not sadly, but with a kind of fondness that made the memory feel alive. "He's been gone a long time now. But I still like the candies." He glanced over from the wiring. "Sounds like he was a good man." "The best," she said simply. When the buzzer finally buzzed, sharp and clear, he tested it from downstairs. It worked. Back upstairs, he found Lily showing the woman how to hold knitting needles. The woman's fingers were stiff, but she tried, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I used to knit all the time," she said. "Socks, sweaters, baby blankets for neighbors. But my hands, they don't listen like they used to." "You're doing great," Lily said earnestly. "Look, you made a loop." It wasn't much, a loose, wobbly stitch. But the woman beamed like she'd just finished a masterpiece. He stayed longer than he meant to. They ate the stew together at the tiny table, the woman insisting he take the bigger portion. As they ate, she told them a story about the winter of '63 when she was a young nurse and got called to a farmhouse in the middle of a blizzard. The woman there was in labor. Roads were blocked, no doctor for miles, so she stayed, boiled water, held the mother's hand through the night, and delivered a healthy baby boy just as the sun rose. "I wrapped him in my own scarf," she said, eyes distant. "His mama cried and kissed my hands. Said I was an angel." Lily's mouth hung open. "You delivered a baby? In a snowstorm?" "I did," the woman said, a quiet pride in her voice. "Sometimes you just do what needs doing." He looked at her differently after that, not just as a lonely old woman, but as someone who'd lived fully, bravely, even when it was hard, someone who'd carried others through their darkest hours. Before they left, he checked the light bulb over the kitchen sink. It flickered badly. "I'll replace that next time," he said. "Next time?" she asked, as if the idea surprised her. "Well," he said, glancing at Lily, who was carefully placing Mr. Hops back in the knitting basket. "If it's all right with you, we might stop by again. Maybe Sundays, if you're up for company." She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, then at the stew bowl, then at the drawing on the wall. Finally, she nodded. "I think I'd like that." They said goodbye at the door. This time, she didn't linger behind it. She stood in the open doorway watching them go. And when Lily turned to wave from the sidewalk, the woman waved back, fully, openly, like she wasn't afraid to be seen. Over the next few weeks, Sundays became their quiet ritual. Sometimes they brought food, a casserole, a loaf of bread, once a small apple pie Lily helped bake. Sometimes they just came with stories. The woman started keeping a small plate of peppermints by the door. She'd set out an extra chair without being asked. And slowly, carefully, she began to share more. Not just old stories, but little worries too. Like how her arthritis made opening jars hard, or how she worried about falling if no one was around. He didn't offer grand solutions, just small helps. He'd open her pill bottles and sort them into a weekly organizer. He'd carry her groceries up the stairs when he saw her struggling with the bags. Once he noticed her mailbox was overflowing, so he started collecting her mail and reading the important letters aloud. Bills, notices, the occasional card from her son. The neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Ruiz from next door started leaving day-old bread from her bakery shift on the woman's doorstep. The teenager who ran the corner store began saving the Sunday paper for her, saying she likes the crossword. Even the laundromat owner, a gruff man who rarely spoke, started knocking to ask if she needed anything when he saw her at the window. None of it was dramatic. No one gave speeches or made big gestures. It was just people seeing someone and choosing to care in the ways they could. One rainy Sunday, Lily came down with a cold and stayed home. He went alone, bringing soup. The woman seemed quieter that day, almost shy. "I missed her," she admitted, stirring her soup. "Silly, isn't it?" "I've only known her a month." "Not silly at all," he said. "She missed you, too. Asked me to tell you Mr. Hops is guarding her stuffed animals while she's sick." The woman smiled. "Tell her I'll knit him a tiny scarf when she's better." He nodded. And in that moment, he realized something. She wasn't just a person they were helping. She was becoming part of their lives. A steady presence, a soft place to land. One afternoon, while fixing a loose cabinet hinge, he found an old photo tucked behind it. Her as a young woman in a nurse's uniform, standing beside a man in a work shirt, both of them laughing under a tree. He didn't say anything, just handed it to her. She took it gently. "That was our 20th anniversary," she said. "We went to the lake. He packed a picnic. Burnt the sandwiches, but I didn't care. He didn't ask what happened to him. She didn't offer. But the photo stayed on the table after that, propped beside Lily's drawings. The change wasn't sudden. It was slow, like the way frost melts in early spring, almost unnoticed until everything feels lighter. The woman sat by the window less often. Instead, she'd be at the table knitting or reading or writing letters. And sometimes, when he and Lily arrived, she'd already have the kettle on, 2 mugs ready, and a new story waiting. She never said thank you in big words. But she showed it, in the way she saved the last cookie for Lily, in the way she asked about his work, in the quiet pride when he told her he'd signed up for night classes to get his mechanics certification. One Sunday, as they left, she called after them from the doorway. Next week, would you like to try my apple cake? I found the recipe in an old cookbook. Haven't made it in 30 years. Lily spun around, eyes wide. Yes, please. He turned and smiled. We'd love that. She nodded, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just warmth, but hope. The kind that comes not from things changing overnight, but from knowing you're not alone in the waiting. And as they walked home under a sky full of stars, Lily holding his hand and chattering about cake, he felt it too, that quiet, steady joy of connection, built one small act of kindness at a time. The apple cake turned out a little dry, she admitted that herself, but no one cared. Lily ate 2 slices, crumbs dusting her chin, and declared it the best cake in the whole world. The man smiled as he watched the woman's face light up at the praise. It wasn't about the cake. It was about being needed, about having something to give again. After that Sunday, things began to shift in ways no one planned, but everyone felt. The woman started leaving her door open a crack when she knew they were coming. Not wide open, just enough to let in the sound of footsteps on the stairs, the sound of laughter from the street. She began keeping a small notebook on the table, jotting down things she wanted to tell them, a funny dream she'd had, a bird that nested in the fire escape, a recipe she remembered from her mother. One afternoon, while the man was tightening a loose hinge on her kitchen cabinet, Lily sat at the table with a coloring book. The woman watched her for a while, then quietly pulled out a ball of soft blue yarn and a pair of knitting needles. Would you like to learn how to make a scarf? She asked. Lily's eyes lit up. For real? For real, the woman said, her voice warm. It takes time, but it's worth it. And so, every Sunday after that, part of their visit became a lesson. The woman's hand still ached, but she found that teaching slowed her down in a good way. She showed Lily how to cast on, how to count stitches, how to fix a dropped loop without panicking. Lily's first scarf was lumpy and uneven, with holes where she'd missed a stitch, but she wore it proudly the next day to school. Word about the Sunday visit started to spread, not in a loud way, but the quiet kind that moves through neighborhoods like a breeze. The teenager from the corner store, who'd been dropping off the Sunday paper, knocked one afternoon with a shy smile. My grandma used to knit, he said. I thought, maybe you could show me too. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Come by next Sunday. Bring your own yarn if you have it, he did. And soon there were 3 of them at the table, Lily, the teenager, and the woman. Needles clicking softly, laughter bubbling up over tangled threads. The man sat nearby, fixing a wobbly chair leg, but mostly just listening. He'd never seen her so animated. Her eyes sparkled when the teenager got his first row right. She even told a story about knitting socks for soldiers during the war, how she'd stay up late, her fingers sore but feeling like she was doing her part. Mrs. Ruiz from next door started joining them too, bringing empanadas wrapped in foil. You can't knit on an empty stomach, she'd say, setting the food on the table like it was nothing. But everyone knew it was something. She'd lost her own mother the year before and said being around the woman reminded her of home. The laundromat owner even showed up once, holding a broken radio. Heard you've got a handy man around here, he said gruffly. The man fixed it in 10 minutes. As a thank you, the owner started letting the woman do her laundry for free. Just bring your basket down, he'd say. I'll run it through the big machine. No one made a big deal out of any of it. There were no speeches, no grand announcements. It was just people showing up in their own ways because they saw someone who mattered, and realized they could matter to her too. The woman began to change in small but real ways. She started dressing more carefully on Sundays, not fancy but neat. She'd brush her hair and put on the pearl earrings her husband had given her on their wedding day. She kept her apartment tidier, not out of pride, but because she wanted it to feel welcoming. She even bought a small potted plant, a peace lily, and placed it on the windowsill. Something alive to look at, she said. One rainy Tuesday when the man was off work, he stopped by with groceries. He found her struggling to open a jar of pickles. Without a word, he took it, twisted the lid loose, and handed it back. She didn't thank him with words. She just smiled and said, "Stay for tea?" He did. And as they sat by the window watching the rain, she told him about her son's last call. "He's got a new baby," she said, her voice soft. "A girl. He sent a photo." She showed him a picture on her phone, her son holding a tiny newborn, both of them exhausted and happy. "I told him I'd knit her a blanket," he said. "He'd like that." The man saw the hope in her eyes, the fragile, tender hope that maybe this new grandchild would bridge the distance between them. He didn't say anything. He just nodded and sipped his tea. That weekend, Lily brought her school friends. 2 girls, both shy at first, but the woman had a way of putting children at ease. She gave them each a ball of yarn and showed them how to make simple friendship bracelets. They stayed for an hour, giggling and tangling threads, and left with bracelets on their wrists and big smiles. After they left, the woman looked around her small apartment. Needles on the table, half-finished scarves draped over chairs, crumbs from cookies on a plate, and sighed. "It's gotten loud in here," she said. The man paused. "Too loud?" She shook her head. "No, just full." In a good way, he understood. Silence wasn't peace if it came from being forgotten. But noise filled with kindness? That was something else entirely. One Sunday, the teenager brought his little sister. She was 8, quiet, with braids and wide eyes. The woman handed her a ball of pink yarn and said, "Let's make something pretty." By the end of the afternoon, the girl had made a lopsided heart-shaped coaster. She held it up like a trophy. The woman reached into her drawer and pulled out a small button, shiny, red, with a tiny flower in the center. "For your next project," she said. "Every good piece of knitting needs a little sparkle." The girl hugged her. Just once, quick and tight. The woman froze for a second, then patted her back gently. After they left, she sat very still for a long time, her hand resting on the spot where the girl had hugged her. The man noticed other changes too. She started going downstairs more, just to check the mail, or to sit on the stoop for 10 minutes with a cup of tea. People waved when they passed. Some stopped to chat. She didn't talk much, but she listened. And that was enough. One afternoon, the community center sent a volunteer, a college student studying social work, to check in on her. "We do wellness visits for seniors in the area," the young woman explained. The woman almost turned her away, but then Lily showed up with a drawing of a cat wearing a birthday hat, and the student stayed for tea. Now she came every other week, reading letters, helping with forms, sometimes just sitting and talking about books. The woman never asked for any of this. She didn't post on social media or call city services. It all grew naturally, like vines climbing a fence, slow, steady, and strong, because one little girl saw someone alone and decided to say hello. And the man? He found himself looking forward to Sundays more than he expected. Not just for Lily's sake, but for his own. In that small apartment, with yarn and stories and shared silence, he felt something he hadn't in years. A sense of belonging that didn't depend on being perfect, just on showing up. One evening, as he walked home after helping her hang a new shelf, he passed the laundromat window and saw her inside, folding clothes. She looked up, saw him, and waved. He waved back. Later that night, Lily asked, "Do you think she's happy now?" He thought for a moment. "I think she's not alone." "And that's a kind of happy," Lily nodded, clutching Mr. Hops. "Good." And in that simple word, he heard the truth. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can offer another person isn't money or advice or even time. It's the quiet certainty that they're seen, that they matter, that someone will knock on their door, not because they have to, but because they want to. And in that small apartment above the laundromat, that certainty was growing, one stitch, one visit, one shared cup of tea at a time. The morning of her 81st birthday dawned crisp and golden, the kind of autumn day that feels like a gift. Sunlight poured through the window, catching dust motes in the air and glinting off the glass of the framed photo on the shelf. Her and her husband, young and smiling under a summer tree. She sat at the table, hands folded around a warm mug of tea, watching the street below. People were already out, walking dogs, heading to the bus stop, sweeping sidewalks. Life hummed along, steady and familiar. She didn't feel the heavy loneliness that had wrapped around her last year. Not today. because today she knew wouldn't be silent. Sure enough, by mid-morning there was a knock at the door. Not the hesitant tap of a stranger, but the cheerful rap of someone who belonged. She opened it to find Lily standing there, cheeks pink from the cool air, holding a small cake box with both hands like it was treasure. Behind her stood the man, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. "We're doing your birthday right this time," he said with a smile. Lily stepped inside without waiting to be asked. 8 candles. One for every decade. She carefully set the cake on the table. It was small, homemade with creamy white frosting and 8 little candles already stuck in neat rows. "I helped bake it," she announced proudly. "Dad burned the first one, so we made a second," he laughed. "Only slightly burned." Before she could respond, another knock came, soft, polite. Mrs. Ruiz stood in the hallway with a covered dish. "Empanadas," she said. "For the birthday girl." Then the teenager from the corner store appeared, holding a potted chrysanthemum. "For your windowsill," he said. "It'll bloom all fall." The college student from the community center arrived next, carrying a stack of handmade cards from kids at the after-school program. "They heard it was your birthday," she explained. "Wanted you to have them." One by one, people came, not many, just enough. The laundromat owner brought a thermos of hot chocolate for the kids. The teenager's little sister shyly handed over a knitted coaster shaped like a star. Even the mail carrier paused on his route to wish her well. Her small apartment filled with voices, laughter, the clink of cups, the rustle of wrapping paper from a scarf Lily had made just for her. The air smelled of cake, spices, and something warmer, something like belonging. When it was time, they gathered around the table. Lily lit the candles one by one, her tongue poking out in concentration. Then, without being told, everyone began to sing. Not perfectly, some off-key, some too loud, some too soft, but together. The woman closed her eyes as the song washed over her. Last year she'd eaten a cupcake in silence. This year she was surrounded by people who knew her name, who'd taken the time to come just for her. She blew out the candles in one breath. No grand wish, just a quiet thank you, deep in her heart. After cake, they stayed. Mrs. Ruiz told a story about her first job at a bakery. The teenager showed off a sweater he'd knitted for his mom. Lily curled up in the armchair with Mr. Hops and the new scarf, half asleep in the afternoon sun. The woman sat at the table sipping tea, listening to the easy hum of conversation around her. She didn't have to say much. She didn't have to perform or pretend. She could just be, and that was enough. Later, as people began to leave, each one hugged her or patted her shoulder or simply said, "See you soon." And she believed them. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Every Tuesday afternoon, she opened her door for tea time. At first, it was just Lily and the teenager. Then others began to drift in. Neighbors' kids, the college student between classes, even a retired teacher from down the block who brought chess sets and old poetry books. They'd drink tea, knit, do homework, or just talk. She didn't plan activities. She just offered space, and people filled it with their presence. She started telling more stories, about delivering babies in snowstorms, about walking miles to nursing school with holes in her shoes, about dancing in the kitchen with her husband to songs on the radio. The kids listened like her words were magic, and maybe they were, because in those stories they heard courage, love, and the quiet strength of ordinary people living through hard times. She also began to give back in her own way. She taught the teenagers how to darn socks and patch elbows. She showed Lily how to write letters by hand. She even started a small mending corner where neighbors could leave torn clothes, and she'd fix them while they waited. Nothing fancy, just a needle, thread, and time. Her son called more often now. Not every week, but regularly, and when he did, he asked about her days. She told him about Tea Tuesdays, about the knitting circle, about the little girl who'd hugged her. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sounds like you've built yourself a family, Ma." "Maybe I have," she replied softly. One Saturday, a package arrived in the mail. Inside was a tiny knitted blanket, soft yellow yarn, perfect stitches, and a photo of her new great-granddaughter wrapped snug in it. On the back, her son had written, "She's got your eyes." She cried then, not from sadness, but from the fullness of it all. Life hadn't given her back what she'd lost, but it had given her something new, connection, purpose, and the quiet joy of being part of a community that cared. The man still came on Sundays, though now it wasn't just him and Lily. Sometimes others joined them, helping fix a leaky faucet, hanging shelves, or just sitting and talking. He'd enrolled in night classes and sometimes brought his textbooks, studying at her table while she knitted. She'd make him tea and leave him in peace, but always checked in with a quiet, "You doing all right?" He always was. And he knew a big part of that was because of her. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, she sat by the window with her knitting. Lily was on the floor drawing. The man was reading a letter from his daughter's school. The apartment was quiet but not empty. It was full of warmth, of history, of shared moments that didn't need to be loud to matter. She looked around and thought about how far she'd come. A year ago, she'd marked her birthday with a store-bought cupcake in silence. Now her life was stitched together with threads of kindness. Some given, some received, all precious. She wasn't rich. Her hands still ached. Her apartment was still small. But she wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. On her windowsill, the peace lily bloomed again. Next to it sat the chrysanthemum, the knitted rabbit, and the photo of her great-granddaughter. And every Tuesday, without fail, the door would open, voices would spill in, and her little room would fill with the sound of people choosing to be together. She'd learned something important over this year. Dignity isn't about never needing help. It's about being seen, valued, and included, exactly as you are. And in this unassuming apartment above a laundromat, she'd found that not through grand gestures, but through the steady, gentle rhythm of human care. As night fell, she tucked Lily into her coat for the walk home. "See you Tuesday?" the girl asked. "Always," the woman said, and meant it. And when the door closed behind them, she didn't feel the silence press in. She felt the echo of laughter, the memory of shared cake, the promise of tomorrow. She turned on the lamp, picked up her knitting, and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in a long time she truly belonged.